Hi and good morning. I'm Alan Bushong. I'm Executive Director of Capital Community Television, and I'm welcoming you to Salem Eclipse 2017. And if you're in Salem, who could possibly not know that today is the day of the total solar eclipse? We'll be on Channel 21 live for the next 3 hours to give you the best look possible at the sun and the eclipse. And we're joined by CCTV volunteer Brad Wortman and his friend Tim Lockram. They're up on the roof taking a look at this. They'll be carrying almost all the conversation today as they tell us what's happening from an astronomy and an enjoyment point of view. So I want to welcome Brad and Tim.
Well, thank you, Alan. Oh, wait a minute. Hi, Alan, and it's good to be here today. I want to welcome everybody here to the Great American Eclipse of 2017 on a beautiful sunny day here in Salem, Oregon. I'm here with my good buddy and longtime friend and fellow astronomy geek, Tim Lockram. Say hi, Tim.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, all right, Alan, and we'll go back to you.
Well, great, thank you. And I want to, first of all, welcome friends from out of town. We know that there are a number of community TV and community media centers that are going to carry the signal either on their channels or on the web. And that includes Ashland, Foxborough, Northeastern, Peabody, and Somerville in Massachusetts, the state of the great franchise fee law. So there's so many wonderful community media centers. Brattleboro in Vermont, Olympia in Washington, our good friend Deb Vinsel there, maybe Sacramento, but Santa Barbara in California, Gresham in Oregon, Duluth in Minnesota, and Campbell County, Kentucky, which is just across the state line from Cincinnati. So welcome to our friends from across the country. We work hard to do a good job with community-based media, and they're doing terrific jobs in their communities too. And Brad, I want to kick it back to you, and people are now seeing you in the Science Center of CCTV.
Well, thank you, Alan. We are just awaiting the first contact of the sun. It's now 9:03 a.m. First contact is going to be at 9:05, 25.6 seconds.
I want to thank the City of Salem and Marion County for their terrific preparation preparing this community. There are very few difficult traffic spots in our area now. They're mainly around the Oregon State Fairgrounds where there is an eclipse viewing party. We want to say they did a great job, and all local residents, by gassing up and going to the grocery store early. The roads are really good in Salem right now. You're all to be thanked. Hope you're all at home watching the eclipse, if not live on CCTV. Sorry, Brad, going to send it back to you.
So we've got a ways to go here this morning, but the excitement builds here as we get up to the very first part. So we're at 9:05:30, so we got just 1 minute left to go. Tim, is there anything you want to tell us a little bit about you? You and I have had a long history together.
Well, we go back to 1979. We met at the University of North Dakota. You had just come up to grad school. I was just finishing up my undergrad degree in geology. And we've just had a friendship since that point, yeah.
Well, okay. So it's now 9:06. We are just starting into the total eclipse cycle. And you won't see much at the beginning here, but you'll start noticing, let's go to the telescope. So let's go to the star of the show. And you'll see that in the upper right-hand corner, you notice how the sun looks a little flatter? That's the moon. That's the moon beginning to cross over into the surface of the sun. And this is being taken from our telescope shot. Here we have a 5-inch celestron, and so the yellow disk is the sun. And you'll probably notice on the disk of the sun there's going to be some little dark dots, and those are sunspots. And the sunspots are good. Tim, you're the solar astronomer. Tell a little more about what sunspots are and how they form.
Well, they're a disturbance on the sun, a magnetic disturbance where the surface of the sun is somewhat cooler than the rest of the surface of the sun, so they appear dark by contrast. They're not really dark. They're just dark in comparison with the rest of the sun.
Cooler areas.
Cooler areas, yeah.
And
Brad, this is Alan. I think this is a good opportunity also to remind people the importance of using their protective eyewear.
Right.
Almost all the sun's brightness is still reaching the earth, and it will be for a long time, so it's critically important that any viewing be done with approved eyewear.
Right, and here's we can, if you want to cut to a shot, here's a pair of glasses hopefully some of you've gotten these. You could have picked these up at Roth's in the area here, or at McDonald's, or any number of places for about $1 or $2 each. And you just got to make sure you wear these when you're looking at the eclipse. And if you're like me and you've got glasses, you got to make sure you wear them on the outside of your glasses. You don't want to wear them on the inside of your glasses. We've got this telescope, and you can see there's actually a camera mounted on top of the telescope too. And we've got this special filter that's right on the front of it, and that filter is it lets in, I think it's 0.001 of 1% of sunlight, and that's what's giving us our image, our view of the solar eclipse. The totality here this morning is going to be about 1 minute and 55 seconds. We have, oh gosh, this is the first transcontinental solar eclipse in 99 years. The last solar eclipse that crossed the U.S. total solar eclipse was in 1979, which is the one that Tim saw. And the next solar eclipse that's going to cross the U.S. is going to be in 2024. And that's going to be across the southeastern U.S. from starting in Texas, and it's going to go all the way up through Maine and up to the maritime provinces. Now, that's for a total solar eclipse. The next solar eclipse of any kind is going to actually be in 2023, and that's going to be again here in Oregon. But it's not going to be a total solar eclipse, because it's going to be a different kind of eclipse, which is what's called an annular eclipse. And you have to remember, when you're talking about eclipses of the sun or the moon, it all has to do with celestial mechanics. That is, the relationship of the sun to the moon and the earth. And because the moon is on a slightly different elevation, a different plane than the plane from the sun to the earth, we get total solar eclipses about or an eclipse of some kind about every 18 months. And sometimes those are total eclipses, but if the moon is if the distance isn't quite right, then the moon won't completely cover the sun, and you get what's called an annular eclipse. And
Basically, the orbits of the moon around the Earth and the orbits of the Earth around the sun are slightly ecliptical. They're not perfectly circular.
Right.
So at some point in the moon's orbit, it's at the furthest point from the Earth, and then 6 months later, it's at its closest point to the Earth. And the same with the Earth and the sun. So it depends on those distances how big each of those images appears in the sky.
Right, right. And the one and only eclipse I've been to was in 2012, and it was an annular eclipse. It was out in eastern Nevada, and it covered, I think, 99.2% of the sun, and it would have been great. You know, it was really nice getting up to the maximum coverage, and then right as the maximum coverage hit, we had a bunch of clouds come in, which is something that happens with eclipses. I mean, you have to figure that they say that during a total eclipse, temperature will drop between 10 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can get things like local cloud formations springing up from sudden cooling off of the earth and water vapor in the air. I mean, right now we have clear skies, but if we look off to the east, we can actually see some really high, thin cirrus clouds. But luckily, we're going to be able to cut through all that. So anyway, the eclipse in 2023 is going to be an annular eclipse, and I think, if memory serves, it's going to cover about 88 or 89% of the sun. But the cool thing about it is it's going to cross over Crater Lake, and for those of you who are familiar with Oregon, that's our one and only major national park. But it's going to cross over Crater Lake, and it's going to cross over through Lakeview, and then go down into Nevada. And it's going to the advantage of an annular eclipse is that the path is much wider. Here we have a pretty narrow path. I think it's 70 miles.
The path of totality, yeah, it's
Maybe
pretty narrow, yeah.
And the path of totality is again dependent on the celestial mechanics, because the closer the moon is to the Earth, the wider the path of totality. And the period of totality then is the time that it takes the moon to actually cross from end to end across the sun. Oh, here we have a plane flying. You know, it was a little earlier we were getting set up and we were watching this, and we actually had a plane fly right in front of the sun. I don't know, Alan, do you think we could get a hold of those guys real quick and get them to cooperate with us?
Reroute that flight.
Reroute that flight? No.
So you can see now the moon has taken quite a bite out of the sun already.
Yeah, I would say this is what, about 10% now, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
It grows on you amazingly fast. You know, you'll see the first 10%, and then you'll see the next, you know, we'll get up to about 25%. And then once you get to about 50% totality, you'll see it starting to get noticeably dimmer outside. And one of the things you can do if you have trees, and gosh, we've got a lot of trees out here, is to go out and look at the shadows that are being cast as the sun filters its way through the leaves on the trees. Because what you'll find, you look at the ground, if you have like a white piece of paper, especially to help make it better, but if you look at the ground, you'll see thousands of little crescents as this eclipse goes on, from the leaves filtering, from the sunlight filtering through the leaves and causing little tiny mini eclipses views of their own.
The intersections, the gaps between the leaves serve as a little pinhole.
Right.
So it's
right.
a bunch of pinhole projections is how
Right.
it works.
And that's a good lead in to talk about how to watch the sun. I mean, you can use the eclipse glasses that we've already discussed. The other option is to use create what's called a pinhole camera. And a pinhole camera is pretty easy to do. You basically get a box or two pieces of paper, and white paper, and you put if you have a box, you put a sheet of white paper in one end of the box, and then in the other end of the box you literally just put a pinhole into the side, and then you hold the side with the pinhole facing the sun, and you can then cast a projection, an image of the sun onto that white piece of paper, and you can actually see the eclipse as it's forming. Oh, let's see, what other...
Let's go back to that annular eclipse in 2023. So what that'll look like then, when the moon's apparent diameter in the sky is slightly smaller than the sun's diameter. So the moon will cover the sun, but you'll still have a complete ring of sunlight around the edge of the moon during what would be totality.
Right, they call that the ring of fire. And I think that's a really cool thing to look at. You know, it's you can see prominences and flares that are coming off the sun. Okay, so some other eclipses to talk about. So if anybody's wanting to travel and wants to go see, you know, you're enthralled by the eclipses, there's going to be another one in 2019, July 2nd in Chile and Argentina, or if you're lucky, out in the South Pacific. And then again in December of 2020 in the South Pacific and South Atlantic. For those who are really adventurous, in 2021 there's going to be one in Antarctica. I think we should go to that one.
That would be a fun trip.
Yeah, let's just do that. Okay. And then in 2024 there's the next one, which is going to be in the Mexico, U.S. and Canada, throughout the south or the eastern U.S. But anyway, the bottom line is there are always eclipses. There's one about every 18 months. Yeah, let's talk about misconceptions. So here's some things that people take note of when you're looking at eclipses. Number one is that total solar eclipses produce harmful rays that cause blindness. No, the sun produces harmful rays that cause blindness, but thankfully, you know, if the sun is covered by the moon, you're blocked from those rays. But the important point here is that, again, you cannot look at the sun until the moon has gone into full eclipse. And right now, we're not at that point. And as we get closer to the end here, totality, we'll talk about that a little more.
Normally, normally the sun is too bright to look at, right? That's why we don't look at it. But when it gets to 80, 90, 95% totality, it's dim enough you can look at it, but you don't want to because
Right.
it will damage your eyes for sure.
Right. Either at least temporarily or permanently damage your eyes.
Yep.
Another question people have, misconception, is says if you're pregnant, you should not watch an eclipse because it can harm your baby. Well, I was not born during an eclipse, and I'm fine, thank you very much. But it said this is related to the idea that harmful radiation is emitted during total solar eclipse, and we've already talked about that. Another misconception that eclipses will poison any food that's prepared during the event. When did we make those bagels this morning?
Early enough.
Early enough, yeah. So again, no, there are no harmful rays. Eclipses are another misconception. Is that eclipses are harbingers of something very bad that's about to happen, and that's interesting because there's there's several cultural aspects to eclipses. And for instance, I was just listening to NPR yesterday morning. They were talking about how the Navajo tribes really see eclipses as as a bad omen, because they see the light as good and the dark as basically as evil. And my apologies to anybody who's Navajo that I haven't explained that exactly right, but the general concept is that that the sun is good and darkness is bad, and I believe that's also true. You went to a talk last night, Tim, at the local Chabad Jewish Center to talk about the mystical aspects of solar eclipses, and that was one of the things you guys discussed, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and what'd they say?
Well, they talked about how many cultures view an eclipse as a bad omen because the sun is covered and the sun is life and light. And I'm probably not explaining it very good, but yeah, many people view it as a bad omen.
Yeah, and throughout time that's been the case. In fact, one of the earliest records of eclipses was in Chinese story about two astronomers who failed to predict an eclipse that occurred, and as a result, they were beheaded. So, thankfully, we don't have to worry about that. So let's see. And speaking of the Chinese and the history, so let's talk a little bit about eclipse history and how long have eclipses been talked about in our human history, and amazingly, it goes back to all the way to 3340 BCE, which is 5,400 years ago, and there were monoliths and petroglyphs at the Came El megalithic monument in Ireland that showed 92 tracks of total solar eclipses. So, given that every one of these occurs every 18 months, in Ireland alone, that this had to go back a very, very, very long time. Chinese records go back to 2134 BCE, where they records say that it included a passage that translates into English as the sun and the moon did not meet harmoniously. So we are now at about probably what, Tim, you say 20?
Probably 20, maybe 25%.
Maybe 25%. So it just creeps up on you. And we are just cranking right along.
This is the Golden Pioneer on top of the Oregon State Capitol building. And let's try to see a little bit more of the downtown. You can see that even with an eclipse going on, we've still got a terrific amount of sunlight. We're right now having the partial that many communities, that's all they'll have today is a partial. And I think Brad said we're about 30% in. But now we're looking at downtown Salem, the First Methodist Church. Passing the church. There's our Starbucks on the north side of CCTV. And just keep going through downtown Salem. The Mattingly mural, the incredibly beautiful Mattingly mural on the back of the historic Elsinore Theater. And you can see again, even with about 30% partial, it looks like the same amount of light as if we had a small amount of haze. And what a terrific picture that we've got here There are a lot of hot air balloons in Salem, and you see a lot of them. Actually, I have a neighbor only a couple blocks away that owns a hot air balloon, and we're seeing a hot air balloon up right now over Salem. That's a really beautiful shot.
So one of the things I was going to ask Tim about was to talk a little bit about his experience in 1979 with the last solar eclipse. So just tell me, where were you? What was it like? Kind of what was your experience with it? And anyway, just take it away.
Sure, I can do that. So I was attending University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, and in 1979, and the path of totality was north of Grand Forks. It was about 97% total in Grand Forks, but not total. So we drove north to Winnipeg, which was dead center in the path of totality. I think my mom and dad and a friend of mine and a couple other folks, we all went up there. We found a park and we set up in a park. And this was February in Winnipeg. And if you've ever been to Winnipeg in February, you know it's cold. So it was very cold. I think it was below zero that day. And we set up and we started watching the eclipse, and it was quite an experience. You could see the sky as the moon came further and further across the sun. You could see the sky starting to darken in that same direction, and eventually you saw the shadow approaching us on the ground, and then we had totality. And I remember the streetlights came on, the birds stopped singing. It was just a eerie, amazing experience. It was one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen in my life. And it lasted, totality there was a little bit longer than this eclipse. I think we had it for about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, something like that.
Right.
And it was just an amazing sight. And I had a Yashica single lens reflex camera, and I was taking pictures during totality, and it was so cold my camera froze. The shutter froze open. So I couldn't take any more pictures, which was fine because that freed me up to just watch it, and that was actually probably more amazing than the photos I got. So during totality, if you are in the path of totality, don't waste those 2 minutes of totality. It's a pretty amazing experience. You see that corona of the sun spreading out around the moon in all directions. It's quite the experience.
Yeah. Now you gotta know, having somebody from North Dakota say that it was cold is really a tell. So.
Well, I wish we had our friends from Bismarck joining us today, and maybe they are. Mary Van Sickle. There's actually only one community media center in the state of North Dakota, and it is in the capital, and they do a terrific job. Now, one of the things that Brad and Tim, I don't know if you talked about, which when you're in the total path, is the speed at which the shadow of totality reaches you. And I understand that it can be anywhere from 1,500 to 2,400 miles an hour. And is that right? And around 1,800, and that would explain why that fits in perfectly with the math of a 90-minute total from coast to coast.
Yeah, and that's the rotation speed of the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it's actually the speed of the moon in its orbit going across the sun is the actual speed of the eclipse. So the moon makes one revolution around the sun every 28 days. The moon is 238,000 miles away from the Earth, so somebody else can do the math.
Right. And I think also it's interesting, considering that the sun rises in the east, and so does the moon rise in the east. The question would be, why does the solar eclipse go from west to east instead of east to west? And that's all has to do with the mechanics. I don't think I've ever heard of an eclipse that goes east to west.
No, because the moon only orbits one direction, right? So it can't happen the other way around. Yeah. Right. One thing we could talk about is why there isn't an eclipse every time the moon orbits the Earth. Why doesn't it come in between the sun and every time it orbits? And of course the reason is because the moon's orbit is tilted slightly with respect to the sun, the Earth's orbit around the sun.
5 degrees or something, right?
Yeah, so it has to just happen to intersect the plane of the sun's orbit as it's a new moon, as we call it, as it passes in front of the sun. So those are the only times we see an eclipse.
The Chinese would describe eclipses as the dragon eating the sun, or for Mayans it was jaguars, I believe, were eating the sun and digesting the sun and then coming it back out. So this is almost like a rebirth event for a lot of people, and there are people who's come out of this completely changed by it.
Well, here's a question for you that I'd like to see if you can answer. Do sunspots change rapidly? It looked to me like there was activity in the lower, almost lower center, but a little bit to the left of the sun that we hadn't seen earlier. And maybe this is Tim's bailiwick. Are we seeing things that could have rapid change there? Areas that go from dark to light in a matter of minutes?
There can be changes that quickly. Typically, they last, a number of hours or even days. But yeah, they can change fairly quickly.
Yeah, and you'll notice that sunspots, when they appear, you can see them appear and disappear, but they will also rotate across the face of the sun. And that's not from them rotating, it's because the sun itself is spinning. And so you can actually observe and watch the sun's rate of spin based on the sunspots.
Yeah, you don't normally think about the sun rotating just like
Right.
the Earth, but it
Right.
does. Yeah.
Right.
And the
And-
moon does too, but the moon rotates at the same speed as it orbits the Earth, so the same side of the moon always faces the Earth.
Right,
Which is kind
right,
of interesting.
And so what is it? It's 10,000 years that it actually takes once in the heart of the sun, once a nuclear fusion reaction releases light. It takes something like 10,000 years for that light to actually reach the surface of the sun, because of the intense gravity of the sun actually keeps the light from escaping the point. Now, that's probably something we should start talking about, because now we are getting into, we're probably more than 60% occultation of the sun now, and as we start getting closer towards the end, we're going to see some interesting events happen. One of those is that as we get down to what we call second contact, which is just the few seconds that occur just at the end when the moon almost has totally covered the sun, you'll see a couple of things happen. One of them is what they call the diamond ring effect, and the diamond ring effect is basically just a point of light that is just one of the last pieces, rays of the sun, and then you'll see it break up. The diamond ring will break up into one or more little tiny points of light, and those are called Bailey's beads. And Bailey's beads are the result of light passing over the surface of the moon between mountains and valleys in the moon. So they were actually first using the eclipses to actually measure the height of mountains at the moon and the valleys, and to get an idea of what the surface topography was like.
Well, we're taking a look here at the downtown a little bit again,
Oh, yeah.
and we're still seeing a lot of light. There's a look at people up on the roof of the Elsinore Theater with the Mattingly mural there in the lower part of the frame. It's not going to be too long until we start to see a loss of light at the ground also. Brad, what are you seeing up there right now?
Right, we are starting to see it starting to get dimmer up here.
Yep.
It's you can definitely tell. One of the advantages up here is we have a white roof that we're working against, and so you can see the shadows are starting to get a little dimmer, and
It's comfortable for me without sunglasses now, looking at this white roof, and it wasn't before.
right earlier,
so.
yeah.
There's a way for people to be involved. You don't have to wait for an eclipse to be involved in astronomy and in science. And science occasionally gets a bad rap, but science has helped us understand amazing things and make amazing improvements. And astronomy is something that's just, well, we're totally interested in. In Salem, we have the Night Sky 45 Astronomy Club, and I was thinking that we might talk a little bit about clubs, some of the activities of clubs when we start after we exit the full eclipse and are exiting then taking our hour and 11 minutes on partial.
Right, yeah, the Night Sky 45 Club is a great way for people to learn more about our local solar system and the stars and the planets, and they have some wonderful events where they go out and bring their telescopes, and they will set up, and you can go out and look at the stars and the sky, and have them help you point. They'll help, very, very helpful, very friendly people. And some other events, like one of my favorites is always to go watch meteor showers. You know, like the Perseid meteors, which is just concluded. In fact, Tim and I, when Tim was moving from North Dakota to Flagstaff, he and I drove his 67,
67
the 67
Rambler Rebel
Ghetto
station
cruiser,
wagon.
the Ghetto Cruiser, and we were in Dead Horse Point State Park, and we were laying out in Dead Horse on our sleeping bags in Dead Horse Point State Park, completely dark, watching meteors for the Perseid meteor shower.
That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah, yeah.
But I wonder if we can get a shot in the downtown and show that how the light actually, we are getting a reduction of light into the downtown. And I'm couching that because it's a tricky thing to do. But yeah, that is not as bright as we saw earlier today. Thank you for that shot. Again, we're looking almost due north from CCTV, past our Starbucks and up north on Church Street there. A beautiful day in Salem, a beautiful day to be in Salem, but we're getting closer.
And again, we're getting quite a bit of wind up here, so the image might be shaking from time to time.
Yeah, it's not just our excitement.
And I forgot to mention that we noted that we had an airplane go through the shot with the sun earlier, and only about 5 to 7 minutes ago with the Crescent, a general aviation craft. I don't know if you noticed that because there's a lot of glare on your monitor. We had a general aviation craft cross the path of the sun. So somewhere around the 10 o'clock mark in our recording, we have another recording of a plane going through the shot. We close a lot of our athletic events on a shot of what we now call moon jet, because a jet that actually, we had a shot of the full moon, and by coincidence a jet went through the shot. And no, we didn't Photoshop either one of them.
Wow. You know, I just noticed that it just seemed to dramatically drop. I mean, it was just like just like a step where it dramatically dropped, and now we're looking out. Now, so we're looking off to the west, and we're not seeing any clouds off to the west, but when we look out to the east, you can see the stratification in the cirrus cloud layers.
And we are just,
along.
Oh my goodness, what a beautiful shot that is.
Oh, there you go. So there's the diffraction effect from the leaves. Oh, really nice shot.
Yeah, good job, Sharam and Sohan, bringing that to us. And now we're almost to 1,600 viewers on YouTube. So we want to welcome all of you. And we're staying through totality and then actually all the way out through partial.
And we're about like probably 90% now.
Yep. It's quite the thin crescent sun right now.
The wind is still blowing. I'm wishing I brought a jacket now.
I'm thinking I'm glad I wore long pants. I was thinking of wearing shorts because it's going to be so hot today, but it's chilly up on this roof right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the high today here is supposed to be 92 degrees, but I'm guessing it's probably 70 some now.
Maybe even in the
cool
high
chilly
60s.
Yeah. Wow, it's just amazing. It just suddenly, you would think that it just gets darker a little at a time, so you would hardly, almost like you wouldn't notice it, but it just comes in little bursts, and it just goes funk, it's down like 10%,
Yeah.
and boom, down another 10%.
That might be our minds doing it, but I don't know.
Oh, you're talking about might be my photo gray sunglasses. But now it's just.
I feel like I have
It's
really
it's-
dark sunglasses on right now.
It's getting really close to like a twilight. Wouldn't you guys say?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And again, as we get close to totality here, you're going to see as just the last thin crescent of the sun starts to disappear, you'll see what's called the diamond ring effect, which is the last little bit of sun, and that will break up into what's called Bailey's beads, which are the sun as it's peeking through the valleys of the moon and being blocked by the mountains of the moon. about 1 minute 20 seconds, and now it gets really dim. That's not us imagining it.
It's just dim.
And I remember, just got to keep your glasses on.
For another minute or so.
Yep. We're 1 minute away from totality. "30 seconds. And you can see the sun just rapidly disappearing. And here we go. We're in totality.
Can you see it, Brad? You need to see this. Real time. Yeah, you gotta see this. Holy. Back on. Woo. That was amazing. Look at the birds.
Brad, can you hear me?
He's just coming back after adjusting the camera. Here's putting his headset.
Yeah, okay, I'm back.
That was pretty amazing, and we had a little bit of trouble on a couple of our images, but hope that we captured most of it for people. It was an amazing thing to see. The brightness of the ring around the sun was something that I didn't expect.
Yeah, the corona is really bright when the moon covers up the main part of the sun.
When the sun hits your eye, like a big pizza pie.
There was a lot of cheering going on during this. Now you're seeing the background here. You're seeing at the state capitol, the ground starting to light up a little bit. We're just surprised by how, Brad, what you told us, how fast the last few minutes of partial seemed to go,
Right.
and how lightning fast totality went.
Right.
I don't know if you heard it downstairs, but there was just as we came out of totality, there was a large flock of birds in the trees across the street, and they all started crying and they took off flying. I think it kind of freaked them out a little bit.
One of the reasons that a lot of people around the country are able to see this is that there are so many communities that have vibrant community media centers like we do in Salem. So again, we are most appreciative of the centers who are able to either pull our feed, our internet feed, and put on their channels, but more frequently just to promote our YouTube feed on Facebook. And again, we have centers from a number of places in the country that are doing this today. And again, Massachusetts being the sometimes almost the alpha and omega with the franchise fee law they have in so many excellent centers. We know Ashland, Foxborough, Northeastern, Peabody, and Somerville on Brattleboro in Vermont, Olympia in Washington, Sacramento and Santa Barbara in California, Gresham, Duluth, Minnesota, and then Campbell County, Kentucky, just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. And we welcome our friends from across the country to what has been a really spectacular morning in Salem with the total eclipse. The first one visible in Salem since 1979, is that right?
That's correct. The same one that Tim saw. First contact is where we go from where the moon first contacts the sun. Second contact was just before totality. We've now just passed third contact, which is just when the moon exits and starts and then fourth contact is when the moon disappears completely. Lunar eclipses are pretty magical in themselves, mainly because the moon is in reverse order. I mean, the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, but the difference being that there's so much light reflected off of the Earth that the moon never goes completely dark. You know, it gets this really deep red or deep brown color to it.
It looks like a penny, a copper-colored penny.
Yeah, copper-colored penny. Yeah, and in fact, we just had what was it, last year? A couple of years ago, we had 3 lunar eclipses in the same year.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Yeah,
which is a very rare event.
And the nice thing about a lunar eclipse is that everyone on Earth can see it. You don't have to be in a specific location on Earth to see it. It's visible as long as you have clear skies and it's dark, you can see it.
If somebody were interested in astronomy and might not have a local astronomy club, how would you suggest that they of course, at the internet, with the web, you've got the world at your fingertips. What suggestion would you have for them getting started, other than maybe Google, but going beyond Google?
Well, there are several good magazines, like Astronomy Magazine, that have sites. Their websites have good introduction to astronomy. Your local community college generally will have an astronomy class, or your local college will have an astronomy class that you can take. Another way is some of the national parks around here are known as dark sky parks, and they have astronomy programs. I know Crater Lake does. Lava Beds National Monument down by Klamath Falls does. Arches in Utah. There's several. Several of those will have classes.
And it doesn't take a lot of money. You can take a pair of binoculars, and if you have an app on your phone to track the stars and the planets, which you can get, I think, just about free, find Jupiter and take a look at it with your binoculars, and you'll be able to see 2, 3, 4 moons of Jupiter orbiting, in a straight line out from Jupiter with a pair of binoculars. Or look at the moon. It's or the little constellation Pleiades. It looks amazing through binoculars. So if you have a cell phone with the app, some kind of astronomy app on it, you can just go out in your front yard if it's not too light from the city lights and enjoy some of those views.
If somebody were interested in astronomy and might not have a local astronomy club, how would you suggest that they of course, at the internet, with the web, you've got the world at your fingertips. What suggestion would you have for them getting started, other than maybe Google, but going beyond Google?
Well, there are several good magazines, like Astronomy Magazine, that have sites. Their websites have good introduction, like Introduction to Astronomy. Your local community college generally will have an astronomy class, or your local college will have an astronomy class that you can take. Another way is some of the national parks around here are known as dark sky parks, and they have astronomy programs. I know Crater Lake does. Lava Beds National Monument down by Klamath Falls does. Arches in Utah. There's several. Several of those will have classes.
And it doesn't take a lot of money. You can take a pair of binoculars, and if you have an app on your phone to track the stars and the planets, which you can get, I think, just about free, find Jupiter and take a look at it with your binoculars, and you'll be able to see 2, 3, 4 moons of Jupiter orbiting, in a straight line out from Jupiter with a pair of binoculars. Or look at the moon. It's or the little constellation Pleiades. It looks amazing through binoculars. So if you have a cell phone with the app, some kind of astronomy app on it, you can just go out in your front yard if it's not too light from the city lights and enjoy some of those views.
Well, that's a good point, and we also have parks close by where you're not going to have so much spill light from cities.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember the last time I saw the Milky Way, which, having grown up in a farm town in the Midwest, I could see all the time because there was no light pollution at all.
Yeah. You can also just get a recliner and go out in mid-August and watch the Perseid meteor shower. Doesn't cost anything other than like I said, a lounge chair so you're comfy and something to cover you to keep you warm.
That's the key, is to be lying down, because if you go out and stand up and stretch your neck and try and see a after 5 minutes, you'll get discouraged and go in. You need to be able to lay out for maybe an hour. My daughter and I were up along the North Shore of Lake Superior on it's the night of August 12th every year, the Perseid meteor shower. Lay down facing to the east-northeast, which is where they will radiate from. And if you have a complete unobstructed view of the sky, you can see 30, 40, 50, 60 an hour, and some of them are bright enough they leave a little vapor trail behind them. It's pretty cool.
Tim, explain why that's an annual event always on the same day.
Sure, yeah. What happens is, the reason the meteor shower occurs is because the Earth is passing through some dust in space, I think from a comet that went through. What was it?
Swift-Tuttle.
Swift-Tuttle, yeah, that's right. Many years ago. And that dust is in the same spot every year. So every year on the night of August 12th is when the Earth intersects it. You can see it for a couple nights before and a couple nights after, but the peak is the night of August 12th, early morning hours of August 13th every year.
Yeah, and as Tim mentioned, so most of the dust is just little tiny specks, less than a grain of sand. The ones that get like pea size will leave a vapor trail, and I'll never forget being up on top of Larch Mountain here just east of Portland. And it's amazing too just how much elevation makes a difference, because you may only be up 800 or 1,000 feet, but you'll feel like they're passing right in front of you. And but I saw one that had a bright blue-green tail, and you could see pieces of the meteorite coming off and leaving like sparks and kind of looking effect.
That is spectacular to see.
Yeah.
To see that, we call that a bolide meteor.
Right.
So yeah.
Church Street and the Starbucks parking lot, and there's Ferry Street. Nobody on Ferry Street right now. Beautiful day in Salem, beautiful day in so many parts of the country today. We've all been sweating this out. You know, what's the weather going to be like on August 21st? Salem historically has a 71% chance of clear skies on August 21st, which means, of course, 29% of the time life isn't so good. And we've had such a hot, dry summer, a record high temperature summer, and so many fires. And the fires threaten viewing in a lot of areas. We'll hope for our friends in eastern Oregon that in the Madras and Prineville areas, where there's so many people going to view the eclipse, that the fires didn't block that possibility today. Now, what are people going to do now with their solar glasses? I don't think that probably a whole lot of people are interested in looking at the sun all that much other than eclipse day. What should people do with these solar glasses?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose most of them will just end up in the trash or as souvenirs. But yeah, I mean, you could certainly keep it to just take a look at the sun periodically. It's kind of cool to be able to see that orange orb of the sun in the sky just by looking up. You know, and there may be another partial eclipse in their future if somebody wants to have a pair of these glasses available.
You can guarantee, though, they're pretty cheap now.
Yeah, they're pretty cheap now. In fact, I've got a couple if you're interested.
So I'm interested, because you're both interested in astronomy. You're interested in astronomy outside of eclipses. Eclipse is a special event. What are the kind of things that you look at? You've got telescopes. What are your favorite things to look at, to photograph, to track?
Well, I'm just a general photography person. I like to do landscapes, geology. I take way too many photographs, yanking off to the side of the road and making Martha White while I stand at a road cut and go, "Oh God, look at that reverse fault! Isn't that something?"
Yeah, I love stargazing, and I really haven't done much astrophotography, but I have a telescope, small telescope, and I love keeping track of the planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Venus. And Venus goes through crescent shapes just like the moon does, and that's kind of fun to see in a telescope. Watching the moons of Jupiter, the great red spot of Jupiter. The Pleiades is a beautiful view in binoculars. Yeah, so those are some of the things that I like to observe.
I should tell them about your first telescope.
Oh, yeah, my first telescope. Basically, it was a 4 1/4 inch reflector, which means it has a mirror at the back of the telescope that reflects the light up back to another secondary mirror mounted at a 45-degree angle, and then out the side of the telescope to the eyepiece. And I basically bought the parts individually and put it together myself. I made the base for it, and God, that little 4 1/4 inch reflector, I used that thing for probably 30 years until finally the mirror got kind of oxidized, and I had to get rid of it.
Working, functioning smoothly.
Yes, we did. Yeah, Brad's telescope decided to start moving on its own without any instructions from us, and so it turned out to be a simple solution. But
Brief moment of panic.
yeah.
Well, Brad, we're going to take a look now at some of the traffic, and we've got really thick traffic on I-5. If you look at this is a northbound at Portland Road. Here we see Mission, the eastbound, and now taking a look at Kubler, and of course there were no cars out on here until just recently. So this is a real issue, and if you don't have to get out there, I mean, if you live in Salem, just stay here. And if you're from another community, pull off and have lunch, you know, because this doesn't look like any fun at all. Even here in West Salem, as we look at 219 coming in. Now if we look at Commercial and Center Street, Lancaster over at the mall, not bad at all in Lancaster. So in town, our streets are good. And it looks like people will be able to get around pretty easily. This, of course, is really close to a CCTV here. And this is just south of where CCTV used to be in the Salem Public Library. There's practically no traffic. And again, close to my house there on the south side where 12th Street comes in. This, you can't see the interstate, Kubler and I-5, because if you could see the interstate, this is what you would see. This is what it's like in Woodburn with people headed back to Portland or Washington. Here we see again Portland Road. So if it's this way, that's a 12-mile distance there. And this throws in another 4 miles, and the traffic's bad in all of it. And then of course the southbound traffic, people headed, it's bad all the way to Highway 34, well, it's 6 miles south of Albany. So again, if there's no need to get out, enjoy the day. It's really pretty. You're not going to work anyway. You could enjoy our feed for another 20 minutes, or you could just hang out in Salem, have a good time here. It'd be a whole lot better than spending time on the interstate in a stop position and burning gasoline. We're seeing a great shot, one of my favorite pictures. I remember Mike on our staff took a picture right after the building was built, and he said it's a unique picture because this roof had never been here. One of my favorite shots looking north into the downtown. Salem has a pretty modest and small downtown, also a beautiful downtown, a lot of trees. You're seeing on the left-hand side the historic Elsinore Theater with the Mattingly mural, picture of Theda Bara as Cleopatra, and also W.C. Fields, Charlie Chaplin and his dog on there, and I believe in Theda Bara, somewhere in her headband, there's a picture of Marlene Dietrich. And you're seeing a little bit of Ferry Street and Church Street and the First Methodist Church, just a little bit north of us with that beautiful white spire. We'd show you a shot of the Capitol building, but there's so many trees, it's actually, this is a much more pleasant shot to look at. Salem's a nice place to visit, nice place to live also. And you can see that the ground now is, even though there's a small amount of sunlight that's blocked by the moon, it's such a small amount that the daylight on the ground looks pretty normal to me.
Yeah, we're just about 10 minutes away from the end of the partial eclipse. Yeah, that mural is really nice, and wasn't it just, what, 3 years ago or so that it was redone from crowdsourcing funding?
Absolutely was. There's a lot of us in the community that donated to that being redone. The mural had taken its toll, a lot of UV light on it, and some of it aged better than others. But the painter who came up from California was terrific. We actually have a short program, and I hope it's on our website, but I don't know how to tell people. And it also includes about a 1.5-minute time lapse. I think that's about the length of the time lapse on the mural being painted. So that was very cool when that happened, and I was one of the people that brought a camera up and set the time lapse on it on a number of days as they tried to beat the rain in September a few years ago.
Oh, well, it is, and the Elsinore is just an absolutely beautiful theater to visit and go to. So as we wrap things up here, Timothy, any final thoughts you have?
There's nothing like a total eclipse. That's
Of the
for
heart?
sure. Well, that too.
Well, I think we will stay on. Yeah, good time for final comments. We're going to stay on until we can see the whole yellow ball. And for people that don't live in Oregon, we don't see this yellow ball a lot in the winter months, although I think it's somewhat overstated how cloudy and rainy it is. But it's we like the summer months, and so it's a special treat. And Kirby lets us know that we've still got 600 people on YouTube and 30 on Facebook. So we're going to be with you probably another 5 to 6 minutes as we watch the eclipse complete.